Hi, hello, welcome back to Stage 2. It's the last session of the afternoon here in Stage 2 at FinTech LIVE London 2024. Welcome to you in the room. Welcome to the many people watching us online around the world. Brilliant to have you, as it were, with us. Just a quick reminder that if you want to ask questions throughout, all you need to do if you're in the room is put your hand up. I will crane my head over and catch you people on my left. Even though I'm looking this way, and if you are online, use the app and your questions will come to me directly and I'll put the questions to our panel, and straight afterwards at 3 o'clock there's drinks out there and our awards at 3:30, just as a reminder. But look, for our last session here on Stage 2, we thought we'd take one of the smallest aspects of the entire weekend event, two-day event, with open banking. And I'm sure we'll get to grips with what's going on and what are the future trends in the next 40 minutes, or at least we'll do our best with an expert panel. So next to me, Nick Corrigan, President International at Global Payments, Henk van Hoola, CEO at Open Banking UK, Tom Burton, Director of Public Policy and External Affairs at GoCardless, and Hugh Davis, Co-founder and CEO at Ozone API. I'm sure when the context is right, you'll explain more about, if you wish to and need to, about what your organisations do. But look, let's crack straight on. Where are we at? Sum it up. Where have we the big milestones in the past year or two before we go on to talk about the future? Henk, why not?
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you that I can kick this off. Where are we? So we've grown a lot in the UK. I think if you look at the numbers last year, we've been like 5-6 million users, and now that kind of has grown to about 11.2 million. So you can see it took us about, we're only 6.5 years young as an industry, which I always say. So 6.5 years. So it took us only like for the last 18 months to double it. So we got quite a growth trajectory. We also see that payments is overtaking anything which is AIS, and also we already see a lot of recurring payments also coming through. About 24% of the payments are now recurring payments, so we do about 20 million payments a month. Biggest penetration we see within SMEs. So SMEs are really picking up and taking up open banking through a lot of use cases. One in 5 SMEs picking up open banking, 1 in 7 consumers and citizens in the country. We think that it's about worth 4 or 5 billion in terms of the business in the sector. About 4,000 people are directly employed in terms of open banking as well in the sector, and some of the companies here next to me. So yes, it's a pivotal time. It's a time of change and critical change again in open banking, because we just completed, the 9 banks have completed the roadmap in terms of what they had to deliver in the last 6.5 years. So we now sitting in kind of a good position where we're looking forward to other activities coming up. And in particular, activities we're doing also with some of the players here in terms of payments, or we can talk about that later, and also for prevention and other initiatives which become more and more, even in the global arena, interesting too.
Yeah, I was just going to build on that. So, I mean, I think huge amount of progress in the UK, as Henk said, but if we look globally, there's been an awful lot of leapfrogging going on. I think open banking, open finance is now most definitely a global phenomenon. It's happening in, it's hard to pin down the exact number of countries, but markets on every continent are now at different stages of implementing open finance. The UK did an incredible job of creating a blueprint that the rest of the world has built on. But what we've seen is a lot of those markets they've been doing it for slightly different reasons, and they've been building on those learnings. And as I say, there's a lot of leapfrogging as markets are looking to improve on the previous version. So right now it's incredibly global. It has advanced hugely over the last 5 or 6 years, but particularly over the last year on a global scale. We were just chatting before. In fact, this morning there's been a very, very big milestone. The US regulator has just put the open banking regulations in force today. That's been announced. So that'll fire the starting gun on perhaps the biggest market yet, with somewhere up to 10,000 financial institutions will all have to implement open banking APIs in the coming 4.5 years. So there's been a huge amount of evolution in the last 12 months on a global front.
Tom, from GoCardless, any thoughts on major milestones so far?
Certainly echo what Henk and Hugh have just said, that we are at a pivotal point in the UK. We're seeing great traction, and I guess it has been a fairly steady uptick in the number of users of open banking. We certainly see that progression just carrying on. So we don't see a big bang event happening in the UK, but we see this incremental growth certainly over the next 5 years. But there's some big choices to be made by the regulators and government that could set the stage for whether we are going to accelerate this journey, particularly for the payment side of things or not, and they're coming up in the very near future. And it is exciting to see what's happening abroad as well. And again, echo Hugh there that we were very much at the forefront of open banking 6.5 years ago. I think in some economies, particularly those where there's a lot of centralized control over the payments infrastructure, they've been able to leapfrog and do more advanced and interesting things, but very much based on the standards that were kind of incubated here in the UK. And then, there's some interesting attempts at trying to blend those two as well, between sort of regulatory and market-led phenomenon. So, the US today, very much a market-led, but a leading open banking centre, and now, as of today, we've got this new rule that will kick in next year and then sort of feed through and be implemented in a staged process over a series of years. But I think, where the US is going, where the EU is looking as well, with an update to PSD2, the sort of founding regulation for open banking, and some of the conversations that we're having in the UK, there's an awful lot of change coming. And I think the regulators and the government have got a really big part in that.
And Nick, from your perspective of global payments?
So I guess from our perspective, I can't top Tom 6 years, but probably about 4 years ago, we started partnering with an organisation to build out the capability as we saw demand from certain segments and certain customers wanting to use the open banking from a payment side, given that's the bulk of the interest from our business. We've seen the sort of segments really move forward, so you've seen utilities and government lead the way, and certainly if you've ever paid your tax bill, you've probably used an open banking transaction, which I'm not sure how that made you feel. But I think what we've definitely seen now is that user journey, that UX, that ease of use has accelerated, so it's got a lot more mainstream. So it's not really a surprise that you see such dramatic growth year over year in transactions. So that's good. I think really now it's about the different scenarios, because we're sort of caught into that, what I would call a conscious buying decision. So it's paying off a bill. It is, if it's a credit card bill, if it's a utility bill, how do we begin to move that into more mainstream, sort of unconscious payments, if you will? So I probably echo the same thing. It's a steady growth, but I think we're on that cusp of it becoming even more mainstream. And then when I saw Visa's announcements a month ago about wrapping around that account-to-account payments and filling the void, trying to fill the void around the potential risks around open banking, you can just begin to see this is becoming much more mainstream than it has been over the last 3 or 4 years.
What are the key drivers of change and innovation? One might like to think that it's the end customers, either me or a small business out there. Is that actually the case, or what key drivers are you seeing?
We do a couple of things. So we're working with a number of central banks and regulators around the world to help them design and deliver open finance frameworks and put in place the technology at a national level. We're also working with banks and FIs around the world to help them deliver their open APIs. It's interesting when you talk to the policymakers, because largely this is being driven by some form of regulatory policy around the world. The thinking's shifted quite a lot. I mean, the UK and Europe, let's be clear, it was basically positioned as a bit of a punishment and a penalty, and created quite a lot of tension in the ecosystem. What we're seeing in a number of markets is a recognition that actually, if this is done right, this is something that transforms societies and economies. So at a policy level, often it's being done to do things like tackle financial inclusion, move away from over-reliance on cash, drive inward investment, company creation, talent pool creation, stuff that drives concrete impact on GDP. So a lot of the regulators who have been driving this recently, whether that's Brazil or the UAE or India, a lot of these things are right at the heart of it. It's absolutely a growth agenda and about improving society. Now, what you've then got to get right is making sure the incentives are well thought through for all participants. I don't think we're there yet in the UK and Europe. So it needs to be designed in a way that it really works for banks and financial institutions. They need APIs that will help them grow their core business, not just open a kind of open doorway to data. And we're seeing that being designed into a number of frameworks. So the API standards are actually allowing embedded finance at scale, account opening, new insurance setup, these sorts of things. There needs to be a commercial model as well. It has to create a sustainable commercial benefit for all parties, not just one side over the other, otherwise it doesn't scale. So whilst there's some really incredible kind of policy ambitions, it has to be designed in a way that it works for the market players, and also, as you say, working for the end customers, the consumers and the businesses. It can unlock a huge amount of potential, but if it isn't designed in the right way, it'll be hard to get past that initial momentum.
Yeah, I think I agree completely with this. It's about the end users in mind in the end and the benefits to...
Is it really?
It is. I think if you're in control of your own data, each individual in this room, so why wouldn't you be in control and decide what happens with that data? And don't forget, what I said, 1 out of 5 is also SMEs. It's also interesting what benefits they have by using open banking. So they could do better cash flow management. They open up their small businesses, opening their accounts to their new account. The accountant has a completely new role in this. There's also a lot of cloud accounting software companies now also integrating open banking in this, who, their customers will avoid late payment fees and other things as well. So there's a lot of benefits, and particularly also then when you bring payments into this as well, because, the A2A conversation in the world is very, very exciting, I think. It is faster payments for everyone. Everybody benefits on that. It is normally, it would be cheaper and more cost-effective for the merchant as well. And don't forget, as to your point, we are getting to a world where we get consistency in the customer experience as well in delivering it. And perhaps the most important one is behind the scenes is the whole fraud prevention behind it. It's less fraudulent as well when it goes straight from A to A, from an account to an account, because the account is provisioned. There are still some nanoseconds in between the transaction that things can go wrong, but then we have partners ensuring that that doesn't happen. So A2A in the world is quite beneficial for both SMEs, for both consumers as well. I think to your point, it has been indeed in the design in the UK an asymmetry, an asymmetric relationship between the TPPs and the banks. And this is what we call leveling up right now. And this is what we are working with the regulators and the government on in terms of bring that in balance. Everybody needs to benefit, but everybody needs to contribute.
Drivers, Dominic?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've just outlined quite a long list of points, actually, of things that could be done to improve open banking in the UK, because there are lots of glitches. I'm glad you asked this question. It gives me the opportunity to plug some new research that we've got coming out on exactly this in a couple of days' time. Yeah, we've looked very much at the situation. We've tried to look at it through a merchant lens, and so we've done some quantitative research, 1,000 merchants, but executives and heads of payments within these businesses to look at this stuff, as well as insights from some of the experts that are operating within the industry to pick out what are the things that need fixing, where are the sort of wrinkles for us to iron out open banking, and what are the solutions to those problems. Henk and Hugh have outlined a good number of those. I would pick up on this, the commerciality point, though, making sure that we get that sustainable framework, because I think that underpins everything else. If you have the incentive structure aligned across the industry, so as everyone's pulling in the same direction, then it's going to be a lot easier than trying to drag one participant in the ecosystem to do something that fundamentally they're not incentivized to do. So yeah, we're hopeful that a combination of some of the efforts that the regulators are making in the UK, working in close collaboration with people like Henk's outfit, Open Banking Limited, and the government can step in and make sure that we have that sort of national vision of what it is that we want to achieve. And yeah, the benefits to customers, because it isn't just consumers, it is small businesses as well, are very plain to see in terms of fraud and reduced costs and better cash flow management, faster settlement times.
Yeah, I'd point to an example that we work quite closely with Virgin Money, or Nationwide now, and recently we did some work with them where really you have two problems really. You have one which is the people paying off their credit cards using debit cards and the cost of acceptance, and that challenge it allows them. On the other side, consumers doing that, there's a delay. There's a 3 to 5 day delay in understanding what you've made your payments, so cash flow management for a consumer on a short-term basis can be quite challenging, and Virgin would talk openly around customers going into penalties and fines because they thought they paid it off. Actually, by introducing open banking and fairly boldly turning off every other payment method through consultation with the regulator, both sides win. Consumer, they had a huge uptick in their NPS and the consumer satisfaction around understanding when that payment's made, avoidance of charges, and meanwhile on the other side you see the cost decline, the cost benefit in terms of being able to accept that payment. And really the key to that from our experience was that run up to the consumer to make sure it's going to look different. And traditionally, you may be sitting there thinking, I'm going to have to enter in a 16-digit card number, I'm going to go and do all these things, or God help me, it's direct debit. So it's really that sort of thing where you see a problem on both sides that's been solved. And that's probably where we find the sort of heartland of really the uptick and the acceptance there.
You've preempted my next question, because I've been picking up on something I think Tom said. We're talking about the glitches that there are, the known glitches. What other known glitches are there and what are those solutions that we can see on the horizon?
Yeah, sure. Happy to kind of unpack that a little bit more. At the minute, the way that banks present their APIs is not necessarily a standard process. So even within the standards that they're all required to follow, there's some room for flexibility and interpretation. So as a consequence, there's a different sort of experience that's provided to TPPs throughout in the user journey, which ultimately impacts the end user. So the commerciality point we just spoke about, I think there's improvements that need to be made to the consumer protection sort of regime, the process, so people understand that when there's a dispute, who to go to and who's responsible for making them good if there's a genuine problem with the payment that's been through. So there's a number of things there that would help with addressing smoothing over some of those issues, as well as balance against that some of the things and the new functionality that would be exciting for driving open banking adoption in the future, like VRPs, or being able to introduce open banking in a more wholesale way at point of sale than is possible today. But one of the interesting things about going through this experience of doing the research is that, when you talk to merchants, you talk to customers about this stuff, actually what you get back can be surprising, and the use cases that they uncover and unpick and the things that they focus on are like really interesting, and sometimes the sort of the richness of that context isn't fully present in the regulatory conversations. Just creating a sort of stable platform, an environment where merchants are able to innovate as well in how they adopt open banking is quite is going to be a helpful thing to go through.
You're nodding.
And we were addressing most of that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's what we call the JROC program, so the Joint Regulatory Oversight Committee, with 3 regulators and Treasury in the room, and you're party of that too. So we have a lot of people in the ecosystem joining us. So improving the performance of open banking is kind of the first work stream, and what we try to do there is share information between the TPPs and the ASPSPs to just get to these pain points and then improve the endpoints, no pun intended, of APIs. The second one is also sharing information on the fraud levels, so that we can kind of combat fraud at source. Because the beauty of open banking standards is at initiation, so I'm talking about the initiation standards here, and payments. So if you can actually combat fraud and detect fraud at source at the beginning, then it doesn't go into the system, the PSOs, and then we then have to have a lot of heavy lifting, as you just heard, dispute management, customer protections and all that. So if you can filter that at the top, we can actually have a lighter payment system as well, more cost effective, and everybody wins as well. And then indeed VRP. So payments, open banking payments, the improvements there. So we are working on an MLA, so a multilateral agreement with the industry. We are also working on a dispute management to tackle this. The functionalities as well is another work stream in this to deal with that. So we need markers and all these PSO systems in terms of to see whether it's an A2A transaction or not. So across the board, as an overlay MLA. And of course, hopefully soon we can announce some progress on the commercial models as well.
And it's interesting. I talked about the leapfrogging earlier, and a lot of the challenges that we've seen in driving adoption in the UK and Europe are already being overcome in other markets. So it's interesting. The UAE looked really closely at the UK and said, what are the things that work really well and we want to repeat, and what are the areas that we want to improve on and build on? And we've been working closely with the central bank and the market, and it's a fascinating model. They've taken a lot of the technical heavy lifting away from the banks. We're providing infrastructure that will help power the market. But the really interesting bit is, firstly, there's a really broad open finance scope. It isn't just about banking products. It's the complete finance landscape. And it isn't just about account information and payments. It's about enabling all of the sort of interaction someone might have with a bank. So yes, it's about consent-based access to information, and there's some really rich payment capabilities that are actually supported by a commercial model and liability and dispute framework. But then beyond that, it is also the tools that help banks embed account opening journeys, lending journeys, new insurance products in marketplaces and third-party journeys. It's the foundations that will create a thriving, vibrant financial services ecosystem. What we shouldn't overlook, though, is this is I think probably a multi-generational infrastructure play, because what's been put in place is a secure way of consent-based access that can connect up all of the different parts of a consumer or a business's world. At the moment, it's in the scope of some banking products. But fundamentally, the capabilities that have been delivered could allow same sort of data sharing across industries, whether it's, I don't know, I'm sharing some medical history with an insurance provider so I can get the right life insurance policy, or educational history with an employer to speed up and improve an onboarding process. These are some fundamental foundations that I think society will benefit from over many, many decades.
It's a good point, because I think you're absolutely spot on about it being generational. I tend to sometimes look at the world through the lens of my 21-year-old daughter and look, never been into a bank ever in her life, is dealing with a check at the moment and phones me up and says, what do I do with this, right? So, and then you get this, then you really overlay that with how many financial products will you have in your life? And now, I read a report the other day that talked about up to 17 now from different providers, because the ease of getting to those products and then the way they're being surfaced up, the barriers are coming down. So it is definitely generational, but you come back to that, the bar in terms of user acceptance, and once they've gone through something, probably back when Monzo or Starling, those sort of guys launched here, that was the bar in terms of being able to open a bank account. That digital sort of experience you have. And that's sort of, I think, where we're going. Open banking is just a massive facilitator of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at what's happened in markets like India,
yeah.
So, and this isn't strictly just open banking, but you had a huge unbanked population, but also within that population, you had people, they might not actually know their date of birth. They might not be able to read and write. And the start point was to put in place some digital identity infrastructure that gave everybody an identity, everybody to then use that identity to sign and assert it was them, which then enabled the opening of bank accounts. And overlaid on top of that, you had payment initiation and access to account information. It's viewed as digital public infrastructure. And it is very much a foundation to transform the economy. And when it's been driven with such kind of clarity from the centre, the adoption levels were, I don't think we've seen anything like it in any market. I mean, look, almost 1 billion digital identities rolled out over a small handful of years. So I think there's a lot that markets can learn from each other in terms of how do you do this in a way that breeds customer trust, but is also designed to solve the particular use cases and pain points for each market. And it looks a little bit different everywhere.
Any questions so far from what you've heard? I don't think I've had any come in from online. Any in the room before we crack on? Yeah, there's somebody over there. Can we get a microphone so that people online can hear the question and get the context? I'm sorry about this stand, by the way, blocking your view this way.
Hi, thank you. Quick question around, you were talking about bringing it, open banking to be mainstream, and I think the word was used was unconscious payments. How would you suggest corporates, SMEs, encourage their users to help consumers take it up? Because at the moment, I think there's a lack of awareness and understanding of what it is. I'm sure most people in this room can explain it, but the lay consumer probably can't.
Who wants to pick that up?
I can start. It's a good question. It's probably my comment around, open banking from a payment side is a very conscious payment. It's a little bit of an interrupt process, I guess, at the moment. As we think about that moving across to being an unconscious payment, then I think you're beginning to see, I guess, if many people have, if you have an Apple Wallet and if you've consented to share your balances, well, there you go. There's your first experience of open banking and sharing data and pulling in balances and those types of things. That's sort of one aspect. I think as we think about going over to SMEs and driving the awareness there, I don't know what the answer to that is, but what we are seeing is you're seeing SMEs try out loyalty aspects. So for anybody that's ever been into a Cafe Nero and got the email saying, if you pay via an open banking, we'll give you a free coffee. So you can begin to see SMEs going down different routes to be able to go and drive a particular payment method and tying the payment method to their loyalty wallet. So I think there's different aspects coming up, but that awareness piece of what is an open banking transaction, what's the benefit for me, that's where I still think there's quite a bit of work to be done around explaining the benefits for a small business or a medium-sized business, both commercially and then also what it offers to the consumer and how that relationship can benefit from it. So.
I think for me it's always the same. If you look at B2B business, when it doesn't work is when you didn't define a clear value proposition, a use case, a specific use case. Focus on what is going to create value for yourself as an enterprise, but also for the end user and for the kind of the business itself we're talking about. I think being very clear on it, whether it's a benefit in a coffee shop or whatever it is, but particularly in payments going forward, this is quite a big margin in that business where you could say things are going to be fast, you're going to have your money quickly. You can optimize your cash flow. It's going to be cheaper as well, and you not get the liability of, fraudulent transactions, because that's what often happens. The liability is moved towards these segments as well. So that's how you overserve them rather than underserve.
I think it isn't something where the plumbing needs to be explained, right? Because it just confuse the hell out of people. But also, I think it should be clear that, say in the UK, for example, at the moment, open banking as a payment method works well for some payment types, but not for others. So I think it's where it solves real pain points, it'll naturally start to come through anyway. If you try and force fit it into areas where it doesn't work that well at the moment, it's going to create unnecessary friction and problems.
And Hugh, you've got that mention about generational. You go around to different countries, they're quite comfortable and understanding how to use wallets and QR codes. That's not the UK, right? So it's a different environment here where generationally we may be thinking about, hey, I just want to tap my phone and this is how this works. But you go to Poland, or if you go, you go into AP, into Asia Pacific, you see consumers behaving differently because it's been done differently for a number of years. So I was really pleasantly surprised when you see BizClik in Poland. It's sort of a forerunner for some of this, and it's there. It's just the consumer behaviour is different.
I wanted to pick up on that. And just by the way, your 21-year-old daughter probably needs to meet my 20-year-old daughter, and they can find out the information they need on TikTok, and we just lead them to it. But look, I wanted to ask about, I don't know if it's the right phrase, but digital inclusion, financial inclusion, because a lot of this, we're talking about younger people in general, if you take from 0 to 100 years old, adopting these technologies. Do we have, I asked this to our previous speaker, are we in danger of having a two-tier financial system here?
Sorry, go on, Tom.
Oh, you go first.
I think we have a two-tier financial system already. It's probably 3-tier, 4-tier. Different customers use different channels,
sure,
and whatever works best for them. I don't think it's easy to stereotype it around generations and age. It's not always quite that simple. I think, again, if I look at different parts of the world, things are being designed in a way that they're opening up access to groups that don't have access today. That's different than closing down access to groups that do have access today. So I think these things will always sit alongside each other. You will have some customers who want to do their banking in a branch. You'll also have a lot of customers who want their banking to be embedded in a third-party platform where they can manage everything in one place. I think we've got an industry that supports all of those different options. So I think it's a good question to ask. How do you make sure it's really inclusive? But I don't think it means it's necessarily bad if it works better for some sections of population than the other. It would be bad if you closed off all other options.
Sure.
But I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, I think so. I think that sometimes the debate around financial inclusion sort of focuses on, well, this needs to be 100% available and usable by everyone. And, certainly in some of the conversations I've had with regulators on different topics, that has been very much like an emphasis or, focus on the 1% rather than the 99% of users. And I think that the challenges that open banking's got, thinking about it through a payment lens, aren't radically different to people just using digital payments full stop. They're from a generational perspective. So as it happens, as with a customer this morning talking about account-to-account payments, so talking about direct debit as well as open banking and the opportunities that are present there. And it turns out that actually their customer base is sort of 55 plus. And, they get checks. They have people who like to set up standing orders. They're more comfortable with credit cards even than they are with debit cards in some instances because a higher proportion of older generations have a credit card compared to younger people. But I think the point around sort of adopting digital payments is, and open banking payments is not radically dissimilar to cards or paying through your Apple Pay. So it's the same kind of challenge. And I think that, I think that like the solution to this is making sure you've got a suite of services and an economy that allows for supporting those individuals who are more cash-based in the round, as opposed to focusing on it from that open banking has to solve this particular solution. And actually, the government and the regulators do that by making sure that bank branches are still available, even though your 21-year-old daughter's not been into a bank branch, and making sure that checks are still going, even though in 2013 the industry tried to phase them out, failed because government and some small businesses were still using them. It's that type of thing. So having a rounded suite of payment options is the best outcome for an economy.
Before we focus now onto what's going to come, what are the big emerging trends, etc. Any more questions from the room? Gentleman there.
Hello, thanks. I have such a question. I understand that different countries face different risks, but in general, what advice would you give to a country just starting with open banking? And what are likely to succeed, and what should be prioritized for the best chance of success?
Shall I start?
Sure.
I often say this because, we have had Bank of Thailand yesterday and other central banks visiting, and they ask often the same question, and I'm sure they ask the same question to you. So for me, the recipe for success is that you you have I always say, a great chef and a great recipe and great ingredients. That's how you cook, if you love to cook. And the great chef is, you have to decide who the chef is, first of all. There's a very centralized approach, like in UAE, for instance, and like in the UK it was, and many, so quoting some numbers, about 60 countries have copied the UK, and about 70 to 80% is really centralized. So you could literally interconnect 48 central banks on open banking if you wanted. So how central is going to be your, so Canada would be in between, you have hybrids, you got the Americas just now going to the right, however, perhaps to the middle again since this morning. So how regulated is it and how open it is? I think that's the second one is your use case, and that could be very wide and deep, but you can't do it all. So in the UK we went reasonably, not wide, but we did at least read right and we went a bit deep, whereas in kind of Australia they went very wide. So that's the second thing, your use case, really define it well. And then for me the ingredients are standardization, because you don't want 6 different, like an EV, electronic vehicle, you don't want 6 different plugs. You want Lego and work together, and that's actually standardization. Secondly is you need to monitor the whole thing. You need to ensure that indeed all these endpoints work in milliseconds and not like in 3-4 seconds, and everybody has to operate under these minimum standards then as well. So monitoring. And then trust. And I think that's also, what Hugh is doing in the world is that you have to have a trusted environment, a trust framework, certification, registration, onboarding, all that quality in your ecosystem. If not, people are not going to trade or release their information for great customer value propositions. So, and then finally, we heard it already, promotion, be an advocate of what you do, specific use cases as well, but really promote it within your country and enable it to happen.
And just to add a little to that, if I may, without wanting to repeat, I think a really important start point for any market is to think about why. Why is open banking or open finance something important to countries? It might be around financial inclusion, it might be around driving inward investment, but thinking carefully about the why tends to then lead to a much better focus on what are the use cases that can have the biggest impact most quickly. And as you were talking about, Henk, that's really important. That then gets you into all of the design considerations around, well, I think one of them which we've touched on, how do you ensure it is commercially sustainable? And it isn't damaging a part of the industry which will create disincentives. But then you've got the technical decisions. Standards are absolutely essential, and making sure standards are implemented well through things like conformance testing. But then, do you have central tools to make it easier for implement? How do you monitor success? All of those sorts of things are really important. But for me, it should always start with the why and the what. You get those things thought through well, the how becomes a lot more logical.
So that segues in the last 60 seconds, we can extend nicely into the question of what's next. What things do you want to see, or what things coming down the road are going to hit us, the big ticket exciting things? 60 seconds each, gentlemen. Who wants to go first?
I'll go. We talked again about the commercial model. It's so important. We'd love to see that resolved in the UK. And for there to be a real focus on that element. If we could solve that and get VRPs, I think we're going to be in a really good place to make sure that open banking payments grow to a level where actually it becomes a self-fulfilling kind of exercise in growing out the market. But in order to get there, I think we need a bit more clarity and focus. I certainly recognise as well the points about like the value that this model has for the economy more broadly. So thinking about open finance and open data and using it in health and using it in utilities and using it in telecoms. But we haven't cracked open banking. And it would be great if we can do that and then use that working model in a way that is going to be super impactful for all these other sectors as well. So that would be my prioritization, focus. Let's crack the commercial stuff and let's have VRPs online.
If you can help the NHS share data across its system, then you'll crack one of the biggest issues, certainly in the UK. Nick, how about for you?
I don't. 2 years ago, I likened open banking to what's going on in the NHS, and I got some very negative feedback saying it can't take that long, right?
No.
But the analogy is there. I think, look, technology, and I'm going to have to focus back on payments probably because it's the side that I have the most experience in, but the technology side of payments is accelerating so quickly.
Yeah.
And the regulation tends to sort of pay a little bit of catch up there. So I think we're not far off from seeing technologies where you'll have a demise of a legacy terminal and soft POS and acceptance anywhere and those sort of things. It's not a small step to be. It should just be a small step to be able to get to automated intelligent payments where you can route transactions in a way that suits your preference and is the most economically advantageous to you or benefit you personally. So I'm sort of hoping the focus continues to go back to the consumer, and then the consumer being able to take advantage of the technologies that are coming on the other side from an acceptance standpoint. So.
Henk and you've only got 30 seconds each, I'm afraid, because we're running out of time. So what are the big
So for
ticket
me,
items coming down?
I'm not going to talk about A2A anymore, but also about data. But
Yeah.
I think fraud prevention at source, I think is going to be huge. We can and A2A as well. So the businesses pay 5 billion a year just on card schemes. So there's a massive opportunity there. So 1.4 billion fraud in this country every year and growing online. So we need to tackle that. Hits the bottom line anyway from many financial services organizations. That's great. And finally, technology. We need to be ready for that next stage. I mean, consent is not one-to-one anymore, it's one-to-many.
Yeah.
So we need to get that data sharing economy ready. We need to be an open ecosystem, interconnect with other ecosystems, and get open banking ready for that through wallets, which was already mentioned here, through multi-consent management, and through decentralized solutions, such as, nice segue to you, trust services as well.
And so for me, I think we will see far more of this happening around the world. Our industry might get a bit distracted by the big shiny thing that's happening over in the US, but we'll continue to see open banking and open finance roll out around the world. We'll continue to see leapfrogging. Hopefully markets will learn from each other a lot more quickly. Two things I'd love to see. I'd love to see banks really grab hold of the opportunity of doing more than just complying, because I think the opportunity is huge for banks. And in the UK, which is my home, I'd love us to see us get beyond open banking and into smart data. And I know Henk and the team and the broader industry are working really hard to try and make that happen.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I've just noticed, Nick, your trainers have got anything can be changed.
There you go.
Written. I think that's a brilliant way of summing up this session. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed.